But the reason Stephen Curry is, in my opinion, the greatest shooter to ever touch a basketball is because he would set unparalleled standards for himself. And one of those standards that I saw back in 2007, while he was still at Davidson, was he would not leave the gym after a workout until he swished 5 free throws in a row. And for any of your listeners right now that have never shot a basketball, just know that's a really high standard. You know, a swish by definition is a perfect shot. It never touches the rim. It never touches the backboard. It gets its name from the sound it makes by going nothing but net. And this young man would set a standard that my ticket to leave the gym is 5 swishes in a row, 5 perfect shots in a row. And that, you know, if you're willing to set incredibly high standards in every area of your life, and you work relentlessly to not only meet but exceed those standards, then you will come as close to maximizing your own performance and contribution and significance that you can.
This is the Business of Advice podcast, where we help good advisors become great business owners. Today, we are going to get a lot better because our guest is a performance coach with over 15 years of experience. Really started working with some NBA superstars, names you would know like Kevin Durant and Steph Curry. But today, Alan Stein works with individuals, executives, corporations to help them level up their habits, their mindset, their discipline to achieve their goals and beyond. Alan, my buddy, it is good to see you. Welcome to the Business of Advice podcast.
Oh, it's so awesome to be with you as well. I'm looking forward to a fun chat and have been looking forward to this since we put it on the calendar.
Yeah, well, great to have you on finally. You know, we met years ago when you spoke at AE. We were trying to do that. That was like six years ago. But then, you know, last fall, you and I want to start here. You and I were both at a men's conference with some other leaders. We got to spend a lot of great time there together. It was one of those, I think both of us were sitting there saying, like, we're not really sure what to expect, but we know there's going to be some other great people here, so we both came. Maybe to start there, would you talk about just the importance that you've seen it of the people that you spend time around?
I mean, if you look at a handful of the most important decisions that you make every single day in your life, I think I could make a compelling argument that the people you choose to invest your time with is one of the most important decisions you'll ever make. And yeah, that experience that you're referencing was transformational for me. It was beyond both liberating and therapeutic to be around other people that at least share the belief of constant growth and constant improvement and constant evolution. And one of the things that made that event in particular so special was most events, at least in my experience, either skew towards professional development or skew towards personal development. And this one just did a masterful job of both. It was like anyone that wants to get better in any area of their life, whether you're running a company or you want to be a better spouse or a better parent, there's a safe place for you to have some resources and to learn from others. And it was just, yeah, I'm a huge believer in intentionally seeking out people that at least have traits that you want to emulate and aspire to be like. And when you can put yourself in powerful rooms like that, you know, it's going to rub off on you. And it certainly did for me.
It was fun. Hard to get to, but it was worth the trip. So maybe start off with, I'd love you to just share a little bit of your background. I know you spent time working with some great NBA players. Kevin Durant was a client for a long time, and now journeyed into really working more with executives, corporations. But just share your journey, and then we'll dive into some questions there too.
Absolutely. So I think for context, what's important for folks to know is basketball was my first love, and I fell in love with the game at 5 years old. And I'm so thankful that here, as I'm knocking on the door of being 50 years old, that basketball is still a major passion and a major pillar in my life. And I spent the first third of my life as a very dedicated basketball player, was fortunate enough to play collegiately at Elon University down in North Carolina. And while I was at Elon, I started to develop an equal love for what we now call the performance training side. Strength and conditioning and fitness and mindset and nutrition. So when I graduated from Elon in the late 90s, I figured what could be better than combining my original love of basketball with this newfound love of performance training. And I became a basketball performance coach. And for the next third of my life, I was a very dedicated and committed basketball performance coach and had an opportunity to work at 2 different very renowned and prestigious high schools here in the Washington, D.C. area that have produced countless players currently in the NBA. But being with those programs also got me some contract work and some opportunities with Nike and Jordan Brand and USA Basketball. So I've had a chance to work alongside, work for, and work with guys like Kobe Bryant and LeBron James and Steve Nash and Stephen Curry. So I've had an incredibly unique journey that I'm so grateful for. And then in the current iteration in 2017, I decided to leave the basketball world completely and pursue a dream and a passion of corporate keynote speaking, which is what I do at present. I work mostly with corporate organizations like AE and deliver keynotes and workshops and trainings, and then often do some deeper dive coaching and consulting with members of the team. But really what I do now is I take all of the lessons and the disciplines and the routines and the approaches and perspectives that I learned from some of the best players and coaches in the game of basketball, and I teach folks how to apply those to their lives and to their businesses. And I'm having an absolute blast in this current chapter of my life.
Well, that's what we're going to dive into, some of those things. Anxious to have you share them with people. Let me ask this, though. Like, you worked with some of the all-time greats in the NBA. What, in your mind, being around them, what separates the superstar, the LeBron James, the Kobe, the Steve Nash, from the 10th guy on the bench?
Well, first and foremost, when we're talking about any sport, but especially basketball, there are certainly some physical predispositions that would help someone play at an elite level. And the guys you just mentioned were born with some favorable dispositions. I mean, these guys are big, strong, fast, they're athletic, they have unbelievable balance and hand-eye coordination. They pick up skills very, very quickly. But aside from that, which is true for most of the players in the NBA, since they're the upper 0.01% of people that have ever played the game, if we shelve that, there are really three traits that unite every high performer I've ever been around. And this is not just high performers on the basketball court, but now that I've been doing the corporate speaking going into my 8th year, every executive like yourself and every member of a business that I've worked with has these same three traits. And I'll give you the quick version of each. And then if you want to pull on some threads and dive deeper, we can. The first is high performers have a strong respect and appreciation for the fundamentals. They know that the basics work and they never get bored with them. They know that mastering the fundamentals, primarily during the unseen hours, is what creates the foundation to which the rest of their house is built. So they have a strong respect and appreciation for the fundamentals. Second thing they do is they do a masterful job of blending confidence with humility. They earn the right to be confident because they've gotten in the reps. They've put in the work. They've done the behind the scenes dirty work to earn the right to be confident. But they brush that with a massive stroke of humility. And humility is what keeps them open to feedback. Humility is what keeps them open to being coached. It's what keeps them open to attending retreats like the one that you and I attended. It's humility that reminds them that no matter how good they've gotten or how successful them or their business is, that they can still get better. They never view themselves as a finished project. They're always going to be under construction. And then the third trait that unites all high performers is they're crystal clear on their goal, their vision, their North Star, what it is that they're pursuing. But they don't spend a ton of time focused on that. They spend their time focused on the process, on the steps. What are the habits and the mindsets and the decisions, that I need to make on a daily basis in order to inch myself or my team closer to that goal. So, a basketball player, for example, they may have the North Star of winning a championship, but that's not what they're thinking about every second of the day. What they're asking themselves is, what can I do today to get me and my team closer to winning a championship? What can I do this workout? What can I do this meal? What can I do this hour that is going to take me a little bit closer? And they're so process focused that they realize that the scoreboard, and I mean that both literally and figuratively, will take care of itself if you focus on the process right in front of you. And it's been my experience that folks that live some version of those three different pillars are inevitably not only successful, which of course is important, and high achievers, but they also have a very high sense of fulfillment. They have a high sense of confidence. They have a high sense of enjoyment in what they're doing. And those three steps are available to all of us. We all might not have been born with the genetic predispositions to play in the NBA, but every single one of us is fully capable of making the decision and the commitment to do those three things.
One of the, I'll maybe jump that first one, and if you're okay, I'll ask you about like some of your interactions with players.
Of
Like
course.
when I hear that respect for the fundamentals, the name that just pops into my mind is Kobe Bryant, right? I think even now after his unfortunate passing, like more and more stories are coming out about just like how much he would focus on his footwork, shooting. I know you've had some interactions with him and seen like kind of his dedication, but like any favorite interaction or story around Kobe, or just maybe even a lesson you've learned from being around him?
Well, absolutely. He's the one that really taught me that lesson. And this was back in 2007 when I had an opportunity to work the first ever Nike Skills Academy. And they built this camp around Kobe Bryant. And they wanted him to serve as a mentor to the top shooting guards in both high school and college at that time. And they built this 4-day skill focused camp. And I had a chance to watch one of Kobe's really early morning workouts that he was doing well before camp even started. And at that time, it was my assertion he was the best player in the world. And I was really surprised as a younger coach when I watched his individual private workout that he was just doing such basic drills. You know, I expected to see a lot of flash, a lot of sizzle, a lot of sexiness, but he was just drilling down on basic movements, basic pivoting drills, basic finishes around the basket. And that really surprised me. And when I asked him about it later that day at camp, he said something to me that changed my life and my perspective forever. I said, Kobe, you're the best player in the world. Why were you doing such basic drills? And he said, why do you think I'm the best player in the world? It's because I never get bored with the basics. And that phrase was just like this lightning bolt. I mean, even now, I've told that story a million times on stages all over the world, and the hairs on my neck still stand up every time I utter that phrase. The best never get bored with the basics. And since that day, I've adopted that as my own personal operating system. You know, in any area of my life where I'm trying to improve, whether it's being a father, whether it's being a speaker, whether it's being a business owner, I try to make sure that I am constantly focused on the basic building blocks and the fundamentals required for excellence in those vocations. And I know from firsthand experience, because I'm far from mastery, that anytime I start to veer away from the basics and fundamentals, I start to decrease my performance. So to me, it's figuring out what the basics are. What are the fundamentals to being good at your craft or being good at whatever you want to excel in, and then working on those relentlessly during the unseen hours.
You know, it's funny, even if you were to apply that to a business setting, I say all the time, like business really isn't that complicated. Sometimes we tend to make it more complicated, but usually the best businesses are the ones that do the fundamentals like exceptionally well, right?
Yeah.
You think of, I don't know, Chick-fil-A, right, from a business standpoint. They do the fundamentals exceptionally well, right? Good quality food, great client experience. I mean, it's not like they have a chicken sandwich that is just crazy different than someone else, but they do the fundamentals and execute them so well.
Absolutely. Well, you know, there's a phrase that I use a lot in my keynotes and workshops, and that is complexity undermines execution. That when we make things unnecessarily complex, they're less likely to be implemented or less likely to actually get done. So the genius in being a leader is figuring out how to simplify, is figuring out how to get rid of and untether from the things that are unnecessary and only focus on what truly matters. And if you do that effectively, usually what you're left with are the fundamentals and are the basics. And, you know, I think, you know, we were talking about both basketball and business. You know, in basketball, we don't need to make it more complicated than it is. Like basketball is a very simple game. If you want to have a successful basketball team, I'll tell you exactly what you need to do. On offense, take the highest percentage shot possible. On defense, force your opponent to take the lowest percentage shot possible. That's it. If you do those two things consistently, the scoreboard will take care of itself. Now, obviously, there's a tremendous amount of nuance around, well, what is the highest percentage shot we can take? And that comes down to role clarity and communication and, you know, who's open and are they in range? So I'm not saying that the nuances are necessarily simple, but the premise of the game is. Well, same thing with business. I mean, ultimately, every single business in existence is in existence because it solves a problem for someone, you know, and you need to be crystal clear on the problem you solve and who you solve it for. And then you need to be able to offer more in value than you ask in payment. If you do those three things, your business will be profitable and will be successful. Now, obviously, there's a lot of nuance among each of those pillars. So we have to be able to pay attention to those. But generally speaking, the premise of basketball and the premise of business is not very complicated. And as leaders, we need to work to keep that simplified.
one of the things I'm going to go back to, just because I want to make sure nobody misses this. And I didn't tell you this when we were together, but we have used this quote. We give you credit. So I'll send you the slide and show you your big picture on it. But it's complexity undermines execution. And I remember you saying that when you were in here 6-7 years ago. And I kid you not, like my partner, you'll think I'm making this up. We do a quarterly meeting with all our people who are in leadership roles. He literally used that quote today. It was so funny. I said, "Did you know I'm interviewing, doing an interview with Alan on the podcast later?" He's like, "No," but we've used that a ton because I think it's one of those things as business owners that is like just instrumental. It's so key to what we've done as we've grown it. Is like you can't. The more complex things get, the tougher it is to execute.
Well, I can't tell you how much that means to me. As a speaker, arguably the best compliment that I can ever get is that something I said resonated and people actually put it into practice and use it. And I also have the humility to know, that I'm standing on the shoulders of those that came before me.
Sure.
Complexity undermining execution is not a concept that I invented by any means. This was taught and shown and mentored into me. And now my belief is, as a leader, is to pay that forward. I think the primary goal of a leader is to build other leaders. It is to empower and support and create autonomy so that others can go out and execute. So I appreciate you sharing that. I'm thrilled you guys use that quote. Please keep paying it forward.
We'll do it. Hey, a little different. I heard you say something. I think it was on a podcast or maybe I read something. You said, early on, even in coaching some of these guys, that you would run into a lot of guys that they loved to play and they were so talented that they just wanted to go out and play. But it was often hard to convince them to put in the practice, because they were so talented. I was thinking about that, like, even personally, I was thinking about, like, where are areas where I'm a pretty good player, like, I've spoke a lot, so it's pretty good. Maybe I'm not putting in the practice. Just any advice, or how would you think about that in the context of, like, a business setting?
Oh, well, there's so many applications, and I'm so glad that you pulled on this thread, because a few thoughts come to mind. And one is, I want to acknowledge the elephant in the room, that the basics can often be boring, that the basics can be mundane, the basics can be monotonous, but the highest performers in the world find some way to lock in or dial in to a portion of the process that still keeps them motivated. If we would be doing some basic drills back when I was in the basketball space and players would say something along the lines of, "I can't believe we're doing these again, these are boring." My answer to them at that time was always, "Is winning boring?" I've never met a player that thinks winning is boring. Well, if you don't think winning is boring, I'm telling you, this is a prerequisite to winning. That mastering these basic movements and these skills is what will allow you to do what maybe you would call the more fun stuff later. So you have to be able to find a way to tap into that. And it's the same thing in business. If you're talking to a group that's in sales, so much of sales has to do with the unseen hours and the due diligence and the prep work that is done before you ever even meet a prospect. Before you send them a proposal or before you have any type of interaction with them, it's the due diligence and the homework you've done and making sure that their need is in perfect alignment with what it is that you offer, either as a service or a product. So there's so much that goes into doing the work before the work. And that's what I want to try and teach folks, how to take pride in that. And that's, that's learning to acknowledge that, sometimes doing the basics aren't the most fun, but what the basics lead to will give you the most fulfillment that you've ever experienced in your life, the most enjoyment, the most satisfaction, the most success in business. It will lead to some major revenue, which is, I know, can be a driving factor for a lot of people. So it's important to be able to, to be able to focus on what it is that you're doing in that moment, but understand and step back the bigger context to how that applies.
That's good. Okay, I want to ask kind of a fun question, but I'm sure there's a lesson in here. So a little different. You mentioned some names that you've worked with in basketball. I think most of those were very physically gifted, right? Durant's a freak. LeBron, Kobe. Was there someone that surprised you with how much they were able to achieve, given maybe their physical talent? And then the lesson maybe in that was there something in their approach that you saw that allowed them to achieve at that level?
Well, the first one that comes to mind is Stephen Curry. And I mentioned that Kobe Bryant Skills Academy that I worked. What I didn't mention was Stephen Curry was actually a college counselor at that camp.
Oh, that's cool.
And at that time, he didn't have the resume, and he certainly didn't have the physical stature or attributes of the other college counselors. Most people thought he was only there because his dad played in the NBA. And as coaches, we learned very quickly that that's not the reason he was there. That where he may have lacked some of the physical attributes. And just to be clear, especially in a game like basketball, I mean, you have the eyeball test. You have size, you have muscularity, you have strength, you have explosiveness. But there are some other tangible qualities that go into athleticism above and beyond brute strength and force. Things like depth perception and proprioception and balance and coordination, hand-eye coordination specifically. And in many of those traits, I mean, Stephen Curry ranks off the charts. He's not the biggest, strongest, most physically imposing player on the court, but he's so savvy because of some of these others. So Stephen Curry is without question a world-class athlete. It just physically manifests different than it does with a LeBron James. But the reason Stephen Curry is, in my opinion, the greatest shooter to ever touch a basketball is because he would set unparalleled standards for himself. And one of those standards that I saw back in 2007, while he was still at Davidson, was he would not leave the gym after a workout until he swished 5 free throws in a row. And for any of your listeners right now that have never shot a basketball, just know that's a really high standard. A swish by definition is a perfect shot. It never touches the rim. It never touches the backboard. It gets its name from the sound it makes by going nothing but net. And this young man would set a standard that my ticket to leave the gym is 5 swishes in a row, 5 perfect shots in a row. And that, if you're willing to set incredibly high standards in every area of your life, and you work relentlessly to not only meet but exceed those standards, then you will come as close to maximizing your own performance and contribution and significance that you can.
I was going to ask this later, but it was around the idea of standards, because this was one of my notes from when you spoke here at AE. You said the standards you set today determine where you are tomorrow. Will you just talk about that, like the benefit of standards and how consistent you see that across like great performers?
Absolutely. I think it was Tony Robbins that said something along the lines of, we don't get our goals, but we get our standards. Or it was something, I'm paraphrasing it. I don't know it exactly. And that really resonated with me when I heard that well over a decade ago. Goals aren't what make us unique. At the beginning of this college basketball season, I'll say all 360 plus teams, but at least the top 50 teams had the goal of winning a national championship. Well, only one team is going to be able to do that. And generally speaking, it's the team that everyone on the team buys in, believes in, and commits to the standard of excellence most consistently. Now, again, this isn't a game of semantics. I know that there have been some world-class teams that do that at a world-class level, and they just were off for one night and they lose a tournament game and it's over. But generally speaking, it's the team that most consistently holds themselves to a high standard in everything that they do. Before we hit record, you and I were kind of talking some college basketball, and I was telling you that in 2018, I had a chance to go speak to the UConn men's basketball team. And that was Coach Hurley's first year at UConn. And he was adamant about bringing in a ton of different outside voices to help him set the culture and show what a championship standard was. And they have spent every day since then trying to instill and live up to and buy in and believe into that standard. And that manifested last year with a national championship. And at least at the time of this recording, they're in the Final Four. So we don't know if that will happen again. But he's a perfect example of, it's the standard is what matters most. And to me, this also goes back to don't worry about outcomes, focus on the process. Even Coach Hurley does not control whether or not his team will win a championship. But his team has way more control whether or not they play to their standard. And I'm a big believer on teams, especially in business, that the most impactful leaders are the ones that help co-create the organization's standards with everybody on the team. And they get everyone to feel safe and included and feel that they have a voice. And collectively, they come up with a handful of standards and say, hey, guys, if we live up to these standards consistently, then the scoreboard will take care of itself.
That's good. And I think the other thing there is if people want to compete at a national championship level, they bring you in to speak, right? It just happens. So
it absolutely does.
If you need a speaker, bring Alan in. So.
Yeah, now I've got to put a caveat in it. It's not a money back guarantee. If that does not happen, I will not be refunding my fee. But yes, I think you have a better than average chance.
One other player, then I want to jump into some other things that I'd love you to talk about, because this is a story I remember going home and telling my kids about it after you spoke here, right? Because it was about Steve Nash, and
Oh
you
yeah.
just talked about how much of a great teammate. So I just felt this was so, one, anyone who listens who may be playing sports or has kids playing sports, like they should go read and see some of the stories of Steve Nash. What a great teammate he was. And there was a surprising reason why he was such a great teammate in those teams that he led, competed at such a high level. I shared it with my kids, but I think there's a great business application to it too, right? If you're going to build a great organization, if you want to be a great leader, a great teammate. So maybe just share like Steve Nash's story and kind of why people found like he was so good at what he did.
Absolutely. Well, there's a few thoughts that kind of underpin that, and these are incredibly applicable to business. And one is, not everyone in your organization can be the best on the team, but every person in the organization can be the best for the team. And one of the mindsets that I preach and teach on stage and on page all of the time is something I learned from my good friend Jay Billis, and that is be the teammate you want to play with. Be the teammate you want to play with. If every single one of us right now reflects on the favorite teammate we've ever had, whether this was when you were a kid playing, little league, or whether it's someone sitting next to you in a cubicle right now, but if you came up with a list of the traits of why they were your favorite teammate, then the next step is to take a deep breath, look in the mirror, and ask yourself, how well do I do those things? If I want a teammate that is supportive, that works hard, has a great attitude, well, then ask yourself, how do you rate in those different areas? And if every single one of us can be the type of teammate that we want to play with, then you'll see cohesion and collaboration and everything improve. And, another one of those questions is, if every single person on our team had my attitude, would that be a good thing? That can be an incredibly humbling question to ask yourself. So all of this underpins what it takes to be a great teammate. And it's been my experience that another thing that makes great teammates is having a contagious and infectious enthusiasm. It's being supportive. It's being a bucket filler. It's pouring into others. And no one did that better than Steve Nash. And it was actually quantified the first year that he won the NBA MVP in the early 2000s, because there was a research team from UC Berkeley, and they were conducting an official study because they wanted to measure if showing signs of physical enthusiasm on the basketball court, high fives and fist bumps and pats on the backside, they wanted to see if that correlated to more wins on the court. They wanted to see if the team that won the most also gave the most high fives, fist bumps, and pats on the backside. Well, at that time, the Phoenix Suns were so enamored with this study that they hired a full-time intern to count just for Steve Nash, which means someone's job was to just watch Steve Nash play basketball and make a tally mark every time he gave a high five, a fist bump, or a pat on the backside. Well, on the very first game that intern counted, Steve Nash delivered an unparalleled and unbelievable 239 high fives, fist bumps, and pats on the backside. I mean, he was an absolute furnace of human connection. And, it has been physiologically proven that we can transfer energy to other human beings through physical touch. I mean, you can indeed raise someone's game with a high five, a fist bump, or a pat on the backside. And of course, when we're talking about corporate culture where physicality and touching may not be appropriate, it's up to you as the leader to create a culture where you can still make those same type of emotional deposits, maybe just not with physical touch. What are the types of things you can do in your organization that give the same morale boost and the same support and the same infectious jolt as a high five, fist bump, or pat on the backside? And then you need to make that contagious with everybody on the team.
Yeah, it was such a great story. I mean, something we've tried to apply. Like you said, you got to be a little careful in a business setting, but simple things, like a thing I see and I watch our teammates do for each other is like handwritten notes, right? They see something, they call it out. They send them a handwritten note, stick a sticky note on their desk, just little things like that. And I think there's just such a great lesson there. Anyone who listens to this, like think about how do you take one, I'd go, because there's a pretty cool article. You may have written it. I don't remember about that with Steve Nash, but like go study what he did and figure out how do you apply that.
Absolutely. And this is where we can use technology to our benefit. There's two things that we can do above and beyond just sending a generic text or an email, which everybody's inboxes and phones are flooded with those. One is you can record, I just call them a voicey note. You can actually record a voice note to send now you're sending it via text, but it's different from the monotony of just typing a text. I can send you a quick voice note. Cody, just want to say what an awesome job you did at the team meeting this morning. I loved your presentation about X, Y, and Z. Can't thank you enough for your commitment to what we're trying to do here, man. Great job. That's an impromptu 15 seconds out of my life. And you listening to that might change your entire physical state, your emotional state. It might give you the jolt that you needed. And one thing I've learned for certain is that which gets praised gets repeated. So one of the things we need to do as leaders and as teammates is catch people doing things right and then acknowledge them for that. You could take it a step further and even shoot a little selfie video so the person can see your face while you're giving them that encouraging message. It could also be something like, hey, Cody, I heard you're going through a really tough time at home right now, and I'm sure you're feeling a little bit down. Just know that I've always got your back, and if you need anything from me, you need me to cover for you, or you just need to talk, just know, man, I've got your back and I believe in you. If someone's going through a really tough time in their life, that 15-second selfie video could be a difference maker, and we never know the impact that our words can have on somebody else. So we need to be very careful in choosing our words, and we need to use them to uplift and to pour into others. And those are two ways, in addition to handwritten notes, which I absolutely love, that we can express that type of gratitude and we can fill other people's buckets the same way as a high five, a fist bump, or a pat on the backside.
Something you said there too. One thing it took me a long time to understand, I do it better now and try and share this with other people in leadership roles here, is how much power your words carry as a leader. Oftentimes I don't think I realize that, both positive and negative, right? That can play against you in both ways, but just realizing that your words do have a lot of power when you're in a leadership role and how to leverage those in a positive way is really, really important.
Yeah. Now, with that said, I love that you said that. That is so insightful. I choose to make some areas of my life intentionally binary. I know that most of what we deal with in the world, it's somewhere in the gray and it's somewhere in the middle. But think about that. As a leader, view it as this. Every single thing you say either helps or it hinders. It either helps or it hurts. It either builds people up or it tears people down. There is nothing neutral. So just have very high discernment in the words that you speak. And of course, when it comes to communication, there's our nonverbals and there's our tone. For me personally, one of my languages is sarcasm. I find sarcastic remarks, partially humorous, but I've learned that you have to be very careful with how you use sarcasm, because if the other person is not on the same page or in alignment with, let's just say, the levity that you're trying to add, you can give someone a pretty deep cut, and you're not yelling at them. You're not using expletives or cursing at them, but you could say something that could really, emotionally jab them. And while you might mean it in kind of a playful, fun way, it could be something that really hurts. And one thing I learned early in my coaching career, when it comes to communication, it's not what you say, it's what they hear that matters. So you may say something and you think it's kind of a playful, funny comment that's in front of the entire team. But if they interpret it as a cut down, that's what they're hearing. And as leaders, we just have to be have such high discernment with the words that we use.
Yeah, that's good. That's my language too. I like sarcasm. That's probably why we hung out so much and got along. In your book, Raise the Game, one of the things you talk a lot about, we didn't really hit on this earlier, but you mentioned the idea of routines and rituals and how important they are for success. Would you just maybe share or elaborate on some routines or rituals that you've seen that are consistent across high performers, be that in sports or business?
Sure. Well, when it comes to self-awareness, one of the most important things that we each need to know about ourselves is, if you look at kind of the spectrum or continuum, on one end you have incredibly spontaneous and free-flowing, and on the other end you have somewhat rigid and very routine. And you need to figure out where you fall in that continuum. And I've known ever since I was a child, I get most of my comfort from structure, from consistency, from routine. Like, I thrive in that. Now, I've met plenty of high performers who are the exact opposite. That actually makes them feel claustrophobic and feel smothered. They like the freedom. So this is not about a right way or a wrong way. It's just a matter of each of us needs to be able to figure out our operating system and how we again, operate best. So for me, I find a lot of comfort in, before I even go to bed at night, this helps me sleep more peacefully. I, for the most part, know what the first hour of my day is going to look like the next day. Now, I don't have it etched out to the millisecond, but I have a morning routine that I believe not only gives me comfort, but also preps my mind, my body, and my heart to be the highest performer I'm capable of. My morning routine lays the foundation for everything else that I'll do that day. So I'm, again, very, almost militant in that routine. Now, one of the cool things is that routine has evolved and grown over the last several years and decades. So my current morning routine is not the same as it was 5, 10, 15 years ago, but I've always had a routine, and it's one that gives me comfort. Now, if you happen to be someone that skews towards being a little bit more spontaneous and free flowing, you don't have to have every minute etched out. You can use some big guardrails, and you can just say, hey, every morning I want to do something that engages my heart, engages my mind, and engages my body. And how long you do those things for, or what things you choose to do, it's a dealer's choice every morning. You can figure it out. But just have some type of idea of what will put you in the state to be the best you can be. And for me, that's my goal every single morning.
One of the things somewhat aligned with this, you said, and I've heard you talk on this a lot, you said time is the great equalizer, right? And that your calendar doesn't lie, like where you're spending your time. And then you talk a lot about like the idea of time management, energy management. Just maybe share things you think any entrepreneur, executive business leader needs to understand around those concepts.
Well, we just need to make sure that we are fully aware of and own what we're choosing to pay attention to. If time is our most precious resource, and I assert that it is, then our attention in the moment is the most valuable currency we have to play with. And I'm certainly not in any position to judge someone's choices or what they choose to do with their time, but I do want to make sure that everybody listening right now is very aware of what they choose to do. Most people are not aware that the moment they wake up, the first thing they do is grab their phone and they spend the next however long checking emails or text or scrolling through social media. And I don't think they've quite made the connection that I've spent an hour of my day doing this thing. And then later in the day, they're like, where's all the time gone? I don't have time to do the things that I claim are most important, because they just weren't aware in that moment of where their attention and their time was going. So all I want is for folks to have that level of awareness. Now, if you choose to do that the moment you wake up, once again, no judgment for me. You have the right to make whatever choices you want. I just want you to own those choices. So to me, what I try and do is I figure out the things that I believe are most important in my life, and I make sure that those are the things that I give my attention to first. And then if there happens to be any discretionary time left after that, then that's just free time to play with. And, not in any particular order, but, the handful of pillars that are most important to me. One is sleep. And I know there's nothing sexy about sleep, but yep. Sleep is really how we kind of recharge our battery mentally, physically, and emotionally so that we can live the high-performing lives that we were created to live. So I prioritize sleep. I have an evening routine and a sleep routine that allows me to get the best quality sleep I can. And even with that emphasis, there are still some nights where I still don't sleep well. I don't sleep long, or I don't sleep well, but at least it's an emphasis. Another area is what I just call my me time. And this is the time that I'm going to try and pour into myself, once again, mentally, physically, and emotionally. This can be time for workout or in the sauna. This can be, anything that I feel like is kind of filling my own personal gas tank. And for me, I need to get at least an hour of me time every day. This can also be enjoying some stillness or meditation or reading, but I want to make sure that I'm getting in that hour. The next is I want to make sure I'm working on my craft. I want to make sure I'm working on my business. I'm working on my speaking chops. I'm working on my relationships. I'm working on growing my business. And then the fourth pillar, and as I said, this is not in any particular order, are my relationships. And for me at this time in my life, I'm in a wonderful relationship with a girlfriend that I adore. I've got 3 kids that I love more than anything in the world. And then I have a whole bunch of friends and colleagues and people like yourself that I want to make sure I am making time to pour into those relationships. I want to make sure that I'm able to be vulnerable with them and share what's going on in my life. But I also want to share, save space where I can hold space for them and really nurture those relationships. So those are the 4 big rocks for me. That certainly doesn't mean those are the only things I do in my life, but those are the things that I try to prioritize and emphasize and reinforce as consistently as possible. And then if there's a little bit of time left over, I can binge watch something on Netflix at night and do that completely guilt-free.
Yep, I love it. I think just understanding where you're spending your time is one of those eye-opening things, right? A lot of time is wasted on things you don't realize, tracking your calendar and seeing where it's spent. So I want to ask you a few, this is probably questions, I guess, maybe around teams. Obviously, you've been around some incredible teams, and maybe two different questions here. The first, let's use UConn, right? Great
Sure.
example. We were talking about them before. And I'll set the stage. We had a record year in 2023, off to a better start in 2024. That means most of the advisors we work with had record years in 2023. A lot are having a great year in 2024. When you've been around those teams, you take UConn, right? Won it all last year. They're back in the Final Four as we're recording this right now. What approach do you take when you've had that type of success to avoid complacency setting in? Like, how do you keep that standard up and keep complacency out of the team in a situation like that?
Well, the short answer is every individual and every team and every organization will find that balance slightly differently. So this also goes back to having the self-awareness to now how we operate best. But we need to make sure that we do celebrate the win. We celebrate the success. We celebrate having the record year, but we don't allow that contentment to bleed into complacency. See, I don't think contentment and complacent mean the same thing, although people use those words as if they're interchangeable. I actually think it's healthy to have a level of contentment with different areas of your life, but never let that turn you into someone that's complacent. Like, I want you to be content in your marriage, in your relationship with your kids, and in your business, but I don't ever want you to stop trying to grow and improve and evolve in those areas. So they don't mean the same thing, at least how I interpret those different words. So on one level, you want to celebrate the things that went well, because the phrase I used earlier was that which gets praised gets repeated. So you want to make sure you acknowledge those top advisors that had record-breaking years. But I don't want you to just acknowledge the outcomes that they had. What you need to do is acknowledge the process that they went through to yield that outcome, because that's what other people can actually apply. So it's not that so-and-so on your team had a record year, but look what so-and-so did behind the scenes. Look what they did, the building blocks during the unseen hours. They made X percentage more calls than anyone else on the team. They sent out X percentage more proposals than anyone else. They have the highest conversion rate of following back up with, measure the process steps so that everyone understands that's why they were the top advisor. It wasn't by accident and it wasn't by luck. It was because they did the process. And that's what we need to try and reward. So if we spend more time praising and rewarding effort, praising and rewarding attitude, praising and rewarding the things we have control over, then we'll yield those better results. And then from there, be able to do a self-audit and say, okay, here are the things that I did really well last year, and I want to keep doing those. Here are the areas of opportunity of growth. Here are some things that I still can grow and I can do better. And really take a look at both sides of that coin. And hopefully, if you have proper balance, that's what you'll be able to say. You'll be able to say, here's the stuff I did well, I'm going to do more of that. And here's the stuff where I have some room to grow, and I'm going to put equal emphasis and focus on that too. And, I've also learned that if you do learn to love the process and you learn to just love the work, then the outcomes just become a byproduct of that. The outcomes just, like the basketball players that love to work out, that love to lift weights, that love to get in shots, that love to practice, that love to watch film, the game is just a reward to them. It's like, oh, great, we get to play in the Final Four. Yeah, that's awesome. But that's because we love doing all of the work. So to me, it all goes back to being process-centered. And when you learn to focus on the process, and you always have the humility to remember that no matter how good of a year you had, you can still get better. Like, your top advisors can do better in 2024 than they did in 2023, even if 2023 was the best year they've ever had. And it's blending that humility with a focus on the process, but still acknowledging and celebrating the win. You put that into a perfect cocktail, and you'll continue to ascend.
And you may have hit it in that answer, but I'll ask this just to see if there's anything else that kind of comes to mind. What I've seen is those organizations that have this culture of excellence that you see winning at the highest levels over and over again. I don't think they probably even talk about complacency, right? Because they've just set this expectation for this is where we're going to be. Are there any strategies around how you do that? Like, how do you build a high-performing team, and then how do you set this standard of excellence that everyone lives up to?
Well, first and foremost, as a leader, you have to set that with yourself. If you're going to expect it of others, you have to expect it of yourself. And I believe Leadership 101, whether we're talking about a CEO or a founder, or we're talking about a parent, is you need to model the behavior that you want to see in others. So the very first thing you need to do is set a high personal standard of excellence in every single thing that you do.
Great.
And then you need to make sure that's not what you're talking, but that's also what you're walking, that everyone sees that you have that level of commitment. I've never had a chance to meet him. Hopefully I will one day, but Nick Saban is legendary for modeling that type of behavior. I've had friends that have been on that staff, and they say, even in his 70s, that man was running, sprinting from drill to drill during the dog days of August during 2-a-days practice, because that was a standard. It was a standard that we will sprint to every drill. And even though I'm in my 70s, I'm not just going to tell you to sprint to every drill. You're going to chase me because I'm going to sprint to every drill. So as leaders, we have to set that standard first.
That's good.
And then we also have to care enough to hold everyone on our team accountable to this very high standard. I'm a big believer that holding someone accountable is something you do for them. It's not something you do to them. That holding a teammate accountable is the best gift you can give them, because in essence, when you hold them accountable to a high standard of excellence, you are unconsciously telling them, I care about you and I care about us. And I'm not going to let you slide by doing less than you're capable of. I'm not going to let you get away by violating one of our core values. I'm not going to let you get away with saying or doing something that's not in alignment with our mission or our standard of excellence. So we have to make sure that we're holding each other accountable. And if you see as a leader, and as leaders, we need to all be very observant, if you start to see some initial signs of complacency or of burnout, then you have to address them immediately. Address them while they're little things before they turn into big things.
Yeah.
And it's normal. It's human nature to occasionally put on the cruise control when things are going really, really well. This doesn't mean that they're bad people. This doesn't mean that they're unmotivated. It doesn't mean that they're not capable. These are all parts of human nature that as leaders, we just have to pay attention to. I think part of being human is being inherently selfish. I think at our core, each and every one of us has that selfish gene where we're looking out for ourselves. You don't need to remind me every morning, Cody, to look out for myself. Like, I'm going to do that inherently. What you do need to remind me of is that it ain't about me. You need to remind me to be a good teammate, to support others, that the we is more important than the me. And that's something all of us need reminders. So the key is when you see someone on the team maybe falling into some complacency, that we're not going to berate them or attack them. We're going to put our arm around them and have some compassion and some empathy and try and coach them out of that current state. And if we can get them to break through that stagnation and break through that complacency, well, that's what being a good leader and being a good teammate is all about.
That's good. Okay, I want to ask you one final question, then we'll jump into some lightning round questions here at the end.
Sure.
This is one of the notes I took from when you spoke here at AE, but you said, if you want to be great at basketball, and I just wrote in my notes, like, where are areas I can apply this in my personal life and business? So I'll maybe ask this generally like that, like, where can people apply this in their life? You said if you want to be great at basketball, you need to take game shots from game spots at game speed. You said a lot of people go out and practice and they're, kind of half-assing it. Not really, but they're like, if you're going to be good, that's what you've got to do. Game shots, game spots, game speed. How would you apply that? It's just kind of like maybe final advice, like to someone, like, how can you apply that to your life and getting better?
Well, it's so funny you brought that up because it's a conversation I have with my own 3 children all of the time. My children, and I've told this to them, I said, my assertion is that you guys like basketball, but you don't love basketball. And that's okay. I'm totally fine with that. But my 3 kids have also told me that they each have the goal of playing college basketball. And I've tried to explain to them that if you have the goal of playing college basketball, which only the upper 1% of people that play in high school will play in college, then you need to commit and you need to really love the game. You need to go from just going outside and casually shooting around for 45 minutes to, as you just said, taking game shots from game spots at game speed. And I've also tried to explain to them, that there's different levels of players. And then I will show you how this has the utility to be applied in business. But you have a player that says, you know what, I'm gonna go take 500 shots today. Okay, well that's going to be a fairly decent player. But then you have a player that says, I'm going to go make 500 shots today. I don't care how many shots it takes me. I'm not leaving till I make 500. Well, I actually think that's a much better approach. But the ones that end up being the Steph Currys of the world say, I'm going to go make one shot 500 separate times. And again, this is not about verbal semantics. There is a different mindset in that approach. It's not just the volume of I just got to put the ball in the basket 500 times. It's I'm going to be so intentional and purposeful and deliberate that this one shot is the only shot that I'm going to take today. And I'm going to make sure I have perfect footwork. I'm going to do everything as well as I can from a process standpoint. And then after that shot, I'm going to do that again for number two. And I'm going to do that 500 times. So that's the approach that we need to have. And really the lesson that we can all pull from that in business is how purposeful and intentional and game-like are the things that we're doing on a regular basis. Are we just casually going through the motions just to say, hey, I did the work? Are we actually being very, very strategic and intentional and have very high discernment with what we're choosing to do and how we're choosing to execute? And the players that make their workouts and practices more game-like are the ones that are able to recall that more effectively when the lights come on and the cheerleaders start dancing. So it's the same thing in business.
Yep, it's so important. We even talk with our advisors all the time. So they're hiring, bringing other advisors in. Like if you're bringing in a younger advisor and you want to get them good really, really quick, like you've got to give them those game reps, right? Like you've got to put them in front of clients, and you've got to know they're not going to be great, but the more reps you get, it's that whole idea of like game shots, game spots, and game speed, and it's just a big, big part of it. So
yeah, well, one of the reasons that I think we've seen the landscape in college basketball change so dramatically over the last several years is, now there have been some exceptions, of course, but we tend to see teams that are more senior heavy and more graduate heavy, guys that have gotten in more reps and have more experience. We tend to see those being a little more successful now than some of the teams that are traditionally just kind of one and done. And it's not necessarily anything to do with talent. It's just when you've played college basketball for 4 or 5 years at 1 or 2 different programs, you have gotten in a lot more game reps. You know, that was something, again, you and I talked about before we hit record. You know, UConn in this current men's basketball Final Four is not only at an advantage because of their on-court talent, but they're also at an advantage because they won the whole thing last year.
Yeah,
like they were in a Final Four last year. They've gotten some reps at the Final Four level of exposure where some of the other teams' current players have not. And it doesn't mean that those other teams can't win. We'll see. But it just means getting in those game reps is incredibly important.
Yeah, that's good. Okay, let me ask you some lightning round. These can be kind of quick answers, whatever comes to mind that we end with. Starting with COVID, I feel like every leader reevaluated some things that they felt they knew. Was there a new lesson that you learned as you went through COVID that you're going to apply for the rest of your life?
Well, my stages of COVID were very clear. For the first 72 hours, I was scared, I was anxious, I was panicked. I watched my entire speaking calendar get wiped off the map, and I couldn't sleep for 3 straight days. After that, 3 straight days of woe is me, I quickly turned the dial and said, but it ain't about me, it's about others. And I decided to be of service. And I tried to figure out how can I add value to as many people as I can and to people that are really hurting. And it dawned on me from a leadership standpoint that the time to actually practice your leadership skills is when things are adverse. Like everyone's a good leader when things are free flowing and everything is awesome. But real leaders are made when things were adverse. So I leaned into that and said, if I want to work on my leadership skills and my ability to impact and influence others, I'm grateful to have this playground to do it, because those were some really tough months.
That's good. What have you done to take you from being good to great in your profession?
Well, I don't know that I'm quite there yet, but I do appreciate the terminology. Yeah. I would say it's a couple of things. One, I am a student of my craft. You know, as a keynote speaker, I don't only study other keynote speakers, and there's a whole host of those that I really admire. But I study stand-up comedians. I study musicians, especially hip-hop artists. I study other people that make their living as orators using spoken word. And I try to adopt and emulate certain traits to create what it is that I do. And then the other half of that is I'm always investing in competent coaching. I'm always intending different masterminds and different experiences. I mean, there were some really profound and amazing speakers at that retreat where you and I reconnected. And my goal is to spend as much time around people that do what I aspire to do at a high level as possible.
That's good. Great transition to my third question. Is there something this year you're doing for your own personal growth and development that you're excited about?
Well, I had a couple of opportunities that were coming up towards the end of summer, but one of the things that I've learned, and this is kind of a post-COVID realization in the speaking world, is that I'm noticing a lot shorter lead times on speaking engagements. Pre-pandemic, groups like AE would hire me 6, 9, 12 months in advance of their event. So I could almost forecast what my calendar was going to look like a year in advance. Post COVID, I kid you not, some of those lead times have shrunk to 2 to 3 weeks.
Wow.
I mean, we're recording this in the beginning of April, and I still have a few holds, people trying to make a decision for things in early May. So the reason I say that is because I am so focused on growing my speaking business at present that I'm a little hesitant to put things on the calendar that are more than 2 to 3 months out. So, but I appreciate you asking that, because you just exposed something that I need to do better of, which I need to get something on my calendar for my development, because right now I've been so focused on growing my speaking business.
Well, let's do it. We'll share some ideas and get it
I would
locked
love
in.
that.
Okay, fourth question. Is there a book that you've recommended most to other leaders? Can't be your own books, but we'll plug those here at the end, but just a book that you've recommended most to others?
There's two. One was arguably the most impactful book I've ever read, and that was Leading with the Heart by Coach K. Came out in the late 90s and radically transformed my view on building teams, on culture, and on leadership. And, even though that book was written in the late 90s, every word of it is still true today. So that's the book that I have read the most, and I have probably given as gifts the most, and I have referred the most. But a newer one, and it's funny, I actually literally have it sitting here on my desk, is a smaller book, and it's called Exactly What to Say by Phil M. Jones, who's a good friend of mine. I actually attended a speaker mastermind he hosted a couple weeks ago in New York City. It's a brilliant book about, and a lot of what you and I have been talking about is the power of the words we choose. And as leaders, we have to have high discernment with our words. Well, this book is, it's literally a pocket-sized masterclass on making sure that the words you choose are the words that are serving you and those around you the best. And it's cool because it's not really a book that you have to read like a traditional book.
Yeah.
It's more of a handy guide that you can kind of thumb through and pick and choose what you need at the moment.
So shameless plug, I've had Phil on the podcast. We've had him speak a few times. So
Oh,
people
yes.
should go back. If they haven't heard that one, go back and listen, because he's masterful with words. It's an incredible book. So
He is remarkable.
yeah. Alan, my friend, thank you for the time today. Great to reconnect, and appreciate you joining and just sharing so much wisdom with our audience. If people want to follow kind of your journey, stay connected to you, podcast, books, you've got a bunch of stuff out there. Maybe just share that with everyone.
Man, this was so much fun. You do a brilliant job navigating the conversation, so I enjoyed it thoroughly.
Thank you.
My main hub is just allsteinjr.com. You can find anything and everything you need there. If anyone listening, if you're looking to bring in someone to speak or run a workshop or training, and you feel my message would resonate, just go to allsteinjr.com. I'm very active and on social media, and I'm very responsive and accessible. So you can also follow me on LinkedIn, Twitter, which I guess we're calling X now, and Instagram, just at Alan Stein Jr. And you could pick up either one of my books, Raise Your Game or Sustain Your Game, on Amazon or Audible or wherever you like to get your books and audiobooks. And would love to hear from anyone. If keep this conversation going. If something in our conversation today really resonated with you, or you want to ask a question or share something, don't be afraid to hit me with a DM on any of those social platforms.
It's great. Everyone should go follow along. Alan, again, appreciate it. And for everyone that listens, remember, this whole thing was about leadership. Our world needs more great leaders today than ever before. So go be great.